What a great thing to be in Nashville for Halloween. So first of all, I want to thank, of course, the Nashville Public Library and this great program, Salon 615, for having me as a speaker, and Parnassus Books and BookPage for helping to bring me here. And I want to also thank all of you who hope to see me in the summertime. As some of you know who were planning on being at that event, I ended up making it as far as Asheville and then getting a horrible stomach flu, which meant that I literally could not even get in the car to get to the airport to get here, and had to sort of stop and hit pause. So for those of you who were inconvenienced that time around, I hope that this more than makes up for it. Because of course, I wouldn't have had as much exciting news to share with you if I'd seen you on the original date as we do now. So, as most of you know, the All Souls trilogy follows the adventures of a reluctant witch named Diana Bishop, who's the last in a long and distinguished line of witches that goes all the way back to the Salem witch trials of 1692. And it also follows the adventures of Matthew Claremont, a geneticist at All Souls College at Oxford University, who just so happens to be a 1,500-year-old vampire. And the third major character in the book is a mysterious manuscript called Ashmole 782 that everybody wants, but nobody really understands. And the three books do really follow the adventures and interconnections of what I consider to be the three main characters. I know a lot of people have favorite characters. It's always kind of exciting for an author when people embrace the smaller characters in the book. I don't think of my books as having anything but major characters, but certainly the book, Ashmole 782 and Matthew and Diana, are the real ones. And the Book of Life, the last book of the trilogy, really does tell the final stage of the arc of the relationship between those three characters. And it really does conclude sort of that part of the story of how are these three things interconnected, these two creatures and a manuscript. So I'm just going to read from the beginning of the Book of Life, because it's a good thing to read on a spooky weekend such as this one. When Shadow of Night ends, Diana and Matthew are coming up the driveway to Set Tour. And if you think for just a minute, they're coming back and they think they're coming back to the exact same situation that they left. But really, life has gone on back at home while they've been gone. And babies have been born. And just as people are born into the world, some of their nearest and one of their nearest and dearest has been taken away from them. Emily Mather, Diana's beloved aunt. So Matthew and Diana are walking straight into a bad situation, but they're not quite aware of it because they just think this is going to be this joyous homecoming. Think for a minute about how everyone in the castle has been both looking forward to and dreading Matthew and Diana's return. It's not like they could Skype or text message with these guys while they were away in 1590. So for them, they've woken up every day for the better part of a year thinking maybe today it'll be the day. Maybe now will be the time when Diana and Matthew will come back, only to have to go to bed at night without having seen them and wondering, maybe something's happened. Maybe they'll never come back. Will we ever see them again? And then thinking, no, okay, it'll be all right. They'll be back. And then doing that same thing the next day, waking up thinking, well, maybe this is the day they came home to us. So it's been a tough year for the people who have been left behind as well. So when Diana and Matthew come up the drive and come into Set Tour, what they don't know is that they are being watched by two of Set Tour's resident ghosts, and that's the part I'm going to read for you tonight. Ghosts didn't have much substance. All they were composed of was memories and heart. Atop one of Set Tour's round towers, Emily Mather pressed a diaphanous hand against the spot in the center of her chest that even now was heavy with dread. Does it ever get easier? Her voice, like the rest of her, was almost imperceptible. The watching, the waiting, the knowing? Not that I've noticed, Philippe de Clermont replied shortly. He was perched nearby, studying his own transparent fingers. Of all the things Philippe disliked about being dead, the inability to touch his wife, Isabeau, his lack of smell or taste, the fact that he had no muscles for a good sparring match, invisibility topped the list. It was a constant reminder of how inconsequential he had become. Emily's face fell, and Philippe silently cursed himself. Since she died, the witch had been his constant companion, cutting his loneliness in two. What was he thinking, barking at her as if she were a servant? Perhaps it will be easier when they don't need us anymore, Philippe said in a gentler tone. He might be the more experienced ghost, but it was Emily who understood the metaphysics of their situation. What the witch had told him went against everything Philippe believed about the afterworld. He thought the living saw the dead because they needed something from them: assistance, forgiveness, retribution. Emily insisted these were nothing more than human myths, and it was only when the living moved on and let go that the dead could appear to them. This information made Isabeau's failure to notice him somewhat easier, but not much. I can't wait to see Em's reaction. She's going to be so surprised. Diana's warm alto floated up to the battlements. Diana and Matthew, Emily and Philippe said in unison, peering down to the cobbled courtyard that surrounded the chateau. There, Philippe said, pointing at the drive. Even dead, he had vampire sight that was sharper than any human's. He was also still handsomer than any creature had a right to be, with his broad shoulders and devilish grin. He turned the latter on Emily, who couldn't help grinning back. They're a fine couple, are they not? Philippe said. Look at how much my son has changed. Vampires weren't supposed to be altered by the passing of time, and therefore Emily expected to see the same black hair, so dark it glinted blue, the same mutable gray-green eyes, cool and remote as a winter sea, the same pale skin and wide mouth. There were a few subtle differences, though, as Philippe suggested. Matthew's hair was shorter, and he had a beard that made him look even more dangerous, like a pirate. She gasped. Is Matthew bigger? He is, Philippe said. I fattened him up when he and Diana were here in 1590. Books were making him soft. Matthew needed to fight more and read less. Philippe had always contended there was such a thing as too much education. Matthew was living proof of it. Diana looks different, too, more like her mother with that long coppery hair, Em said, acknowledging the most obvious change in her niece. Diana stumbled on a cobblestone, and Matthew's hand shot out to steady her. Once, Emily had seen Matthew's incessant hovering as a sign of vampire overprotectiveness. Now, with the perspicacity of a ghost, she realized that this tendency stemmed from his preternatural awareness of every change in Diana's expression, every shift of mood, every sign of fatigue or hunger. Today, however, Matthew's concern seemed even more focused and acute. It's not just Diana's hair that's changed. Philippe's face had a look of wonder. Diana is with child. Matthew's child. Emily examined her niece more carefully. Philippe was right, in part. You mean with children, she said. Diana is having twins. Twins, Philippe said in an odd voice. He looked away, distracted by the appearance of his wife. Look, here are Isabeau and Sarah with Sophie and Margaret. What will happen now, Philippe? Emily asked, her heart growing heavier with anticipation. Endings, beginnings, Philippe said with deliberate vagueness. Change. Diana has never liked change, Emily said. That is because Diana is afraid of what she must become, Philippe replied. So, that's where we start, with a reminder of endings, beginnings, and change, sort of the theme for tonight's talk, I think, because while the All Souls trilogy has ended with 3 books, I'm very proud of having pulled off a 3-book trilogy. Now there are many, many volume trilogies that go into the 9s and 10s and 15s, but I really did want to write a trilogy. It was always in my mind a story that was in 3 parts. A beginning with Diana and Matthew meeting each other, a middle part where they got to go back to the past to find out from the past things they could only learn there and not in the present, and then a return to the present and to a sort of a new future that they would help to make together. So I always knew it was a story in 3 parts, and even though there were moments when writing the Book of Life, which was the hardest of the 3 books to write, I have to tell you, for lots of reasons, while I was writing the Book of Life, there were moments when I thought, I just can't do it. I can't finish this in 3 books. It's too complicated. I can't wrap all the threads up. I somehow managed to do it, and I'm glad that I managed to do it because, like I said, it really, even though a lot of new characters were introduced and a lot of plot twists were introduced, it really was always, for me, a story about Matthew and Diana and Ashmole 782. And what finishing meant was that it gave me a little bit of time to figure out, A, whether or not I wanted to go back into this All Souls world that I'd created, and B, if I did want to go back, how in the world was I ever going to do it? Because I never wanted to just give you all more. I've gotten very fond of all of you over the past many years and very grateful for the support that you've given Matthew and Diana and their strange and sprawling family. But I never wanted to just chug out more so that when you went into Parnassus, you sort of looked at your best friend and rolled your eyes and said, oh God, she's written another one. And you know what I'm talking about here, right? So I've got a file cabinet full of backstories for these characters. And that is because the center of the All Souls universe, for me at least, is Philippe. If you think about All Souls as a kind of cosmos, he's the axis. He's the center of gravity around which all the other stories moved. And what that means is that I needed to know where Philippe was and what he was doing, living or dead, in the case of the Book of Life, for everything that happened from Matthew's creation as a vampire in 537 AD all the way down into the 21st century. That's a lot of file folders to try to work that out because I couldn't put any other planet in the system and put it into motion without knowing where Philippe was at all times. However, I didn't, I didn't just want to give you more. I didn't want to just give you more history and more backstories. There needed to be something else going on. And so I took a little break from writing. Now, I know for some of you think, what is she talking about? She takes breaks all the time. There are years between this woman's books. What is she doing? Buffing her nails. But actually, that's your experience as a reader, is these periods of wait in between books. But my experience as a writer was that I started writing in autumn of 2008, and I did not stop writing until January of 2014, when the manuscript for the Book of Life finally went through the publishing process. Because that time was taken up with not only writing, but editing, revising, rewriting, copy editing, which takes a lot of time, and I'm not good at it. I'm not a detail person, so I have to employ friends and family, and we have to read things backwards so that we catch as many mistakes as we can. So reading an entire book like the Book of Life backwards, word by word, to catch typos is not fun. It's not one of those joyful tasks that you can do for 15 hours a day. And so it takes us just a long time, and it takes a book designer. The books are beautiful. I think we can all agree. The covers, the insides of them, that all just takes a long time. So for me, it's been really constant and steady for all that period until January of 2014, when I sent off the Book of Life to New York to go through the printing press, and I took a rest. Now, rest should be used advisedly. I was still teaching, and then I went on tour, and then I got sick, and then I got off tour. And it wasn't until I got off tour that I sort of suddenly realized that I had a way to tell the backstories. So you're going to be the first to hear this, and I haven't really cleared this with anybody, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because I know you won't tell anyone, which is that what I realized was that Diana, now that she's back in the present, has access to the largest unexplored personal archive that has ever existed in the history of the world, which is the de Clermont family papers. And I thought, ooh, that could be fun. And not only that, but she's also got lots of really fun stuff to look at. And I thought, I bet you in her spare time, Phoebe Taylor has been cataloging some of that stuff and thinking, what is that? And why does they have that in this house? And so the new series of books is going to really follow Diana and Phoebe as they try to catalog and come to terms with this family and its history. And remember, this is a family that is pretty complicated and has come in touch with a lot of people and a lot of creatures over the years. So there's going to be opportunities for Diana and Phoebe to not only explore the de Clermonts, but the Bishops and the Weavers and a lot of other characters that we've sort of met along the way. And that was when I finally realized I had a way to tell you backstories that weren't going to just be, one after the other kind of assault on you at the bookstore, but to give you something to sort of fun to follow along with. So The Serpent's Mirror takes place about a year after the end of Book of Life. So the twins have gone from being not terribly interesting 6-month-olds to being pretty interesting 18-month-olds. So we'll get to see 2 tiny little somethings and see how they're developing. We'll be with Diana and Matthew and Phoebe and Marcus and Isabeau and Sarah and other characters you love. But we're also going to be following a sort of mystery, which is that as Diana gets into that archive, she starts tripping across a lot of evidence about just how busy Matthew was in the 16th century working as a spy for Elizabeth. Now, this was not the first story I thought I was going to end up telling you. I was pretty determined that I was going to tell you some of Marcus's backstory. And I actually wrote a fair chunk of Marcus's backstory, and Matthew just proved to be insanely bossy. And this, I say that and it sounds very kind of precious and cutesy, but it's really true that when you're a writer of fiction, I think I didn't know this. I just thought, you sat down and made stuff up, but it was all really easy. But when you have characters as strong as mine, they can be really kind of elbow you along and tell you what they want to do. And so I was trying very hard to write about the Battle of Brandywine, and instead I was finding myself, thinking about Elizabeth I and her relationship with Matthew. And so Matthew got first dibs on it. I guess he has a right to do that. But I imagine that there'll be lots of other tales that archive and those characters can tell over the next several years. It is a series, which means I have no idea how many stories are in there. I have no idea what will happen with all of them, but I know that we've set a date to share the first one with you in 2017, which again, for those of you who are thinking, what is she going to do with herself between then and now? Well, I'm on page like 125, so I'm going to finish it first, and then it's going to go through that long process of editing and re-editing and revision and all the things that make a book really good and sparkly, and why you like the books that you like is in part because they've been handled so beautifully through the production process. So I promise you, the wait will be worth it, and the book will be in your hands soon. So you're so kind. One of the things I also will be doing, though, it's not all just about the book, in our spirit of beginnings and endings. We've also got some changes in store for us, because I think we are really moving towards having not just the books in our lives, but also adaptations of the books for television. So I just want to talk a little bit about that process, because this is the change portion of things, in that the books, as many of you know, it's not that nobody has thought this would be a great thing to put on a screen, either large or small. The first people who tried to do that were a very talented team over a period of about 18 months at Warner Brothers. And it just became really, really clear to everybody involved that it was going to be quite difficult to take a book of the size and complexity of Discovery of Witches and boil it down into a 90-minute movie, even a 2-hour movie. And as the things started piling up on the cutting room floor, whole storylines, whole characters, scenes that I kept saying, I don't know how they're going to like it if the yoga scene isn't in the movie at all, kind of things. It just became really tough. And it became tough because what I learned is that movies tend to tell one story. And they tend to tell one story with a main protagonist male, a main protagonist female, a certain limited number, i.e. not Deb Harkness's universe of supporting characters. And that then, they follow that, and everything needs to be tied up really neatly in a bow, etc. And that's just not the kind of story I told. And so to do it on the big screen was going to really require that we be fairly violent to it. And I think at that point, to Warner Brothers' very great credit, and to the production team's credit, Denise Genovi and Allison Greenspan, who made things like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants and the Winona Ryder adaptation of Little Women. I mean, these were incredibly talented people. Everybody just said, this doesn't feel right. This is not going so well. So at that point, I was really busy trying to finish Shadow of Night, which you were all eager to get, and move on to Book of Life, which you were also going to be eager to get. I knew about 18 hours after you'd gotten Shadow of Night. And so I just sort of put a hold on everything, and then people started coming to me and talking about television adaptations. So it is currently optioned for television, and we're in that stage where we're trying to figure out things like broadcasters and who's going to show it where and when, but even more importantly on the creative side. So I can't tell you any of that information, but on the creative side, I can tell you that we're at the stage where we're hiring writer to work, and I am working very closely with the writer. One of the questions I always get is, do you have control over this process? And I hate to tell you all, but honey, I don't have control over anything in my life. Certainly not anything as complicated as a television show. So, and really, TV is a very different medium. It's very collaborative. It's about people who sit around in rooms, groups of people, and try to puzzle things out. And I can do that. I'm a teacher. I sit in rooms with students, and we try to puzzle things out together. So it's really okay. But it is also a process where you have to kind of share, and you have to pick your battles, and you have to know what it is that you're really eager to do. I can't, unfortunately, give you lots of details about the exact identities of all of these people because it's not quite that, we're not quite there yet. But we are working on, we're writing the first episode right now. We're working out the series Bible is what it's called, the kind of how is the show going to be episode to episode. They are not talking about doing a Discovery of Witches, Shadow of Night, and Book of Life in one season. No. I think we won't even get through Discovery of Witches in season 1. So they are approaching this in, I think, a spirit that probably most of you in the room will really appreciate. Some of them are headed off to Oxford to go look at things this week. Actually, yeah, I know. And I'm teaching. So like, can you come? And I said, no, I can't come because I was just away. I'm in Nashville and New York, and now I have to go back and my students, and you have to do it without me. And I thought, oh, this is hard because it would be so much fun to go to Oxford with people and say, yeah, that'll make a beautiful shot. Wouldn't that be fun? It would be awesome. Yeah, and to Oxford, not to mention. So we're really working at that. We're talking to special effects people because we want it to be beautiful and believable and lovely. And they're also talking to casting directors. So one of your many, many questions is, who do I see as these characters? And I have to tell you, I have no idea who they're going to cast in these roles. And I think that's probably a good thing, because I still remember this time when I was watching BBC and I was watching a show called Hexed. Did anybody watch Hexed, about a haunted, possessed boarding school where the devil was the headmaster? And he was really handsome. And he came out, and I thought, wow, who is that? I have never seen him before. And I watched this show, and that was his start, and that actor's name was Michael Fassbender. So British TV directors and casting people, they seem to be able to find really interesting people to put in television shows like Benedict Cumberbatch and Michael Fassbender, who then go on to do other things. So I'm kind of feeling like maybe we should just let them do their thing instead of telling them what we think they should do, because what they come up with might be even more brilliant. But to be moving in the direction of writers and special effects and casting directors and writing the first episode, this is all really good news, right? Because it means that the project is up and it has some momentum and it's really working. And that's kind of what we want. So I'm really hoping that you'll get news about this much before you'll get your hands on the Serpent's Mirror, I think. I think early in 2016, you're going to be getting news that isn't just like, this is going to be made into TV one day soon, but sort of a more like, this is going to start shooting and the broadcast date will be sorts of news. So that's going to be the change part, because you and me and everybody who's been part of the All Souls journey, and I really do feel like my readers have been part of the All Souls journey all along, we're all going to have to get used to a little bit of change, right? Whoever they pick, no matter how great they are, if I were to take a poll right now and say who should be Matthew, I promise you there'd be at least 18 people with 18 people laid out there as perfect Matthews. We all see something slightly different. We are all going to see something slightly different and not agree with a decision I've made, because one of my favorite things that happens to me is I'll say, well, this is what so-and-so looks like. And they'll say, no, no. That's not it at all. And they'll be like, this is who should play Satu. And I'm like, she's a brunette. Satu has platinum blonde hair. No, she doesn't. No way, she doesn't. She's dark. And I'm thinking, no, I'm pretty sure she's got platinum hair. So even, it might be my decisions that you disagree with, but we're all going to have to kind of get used to that and be open to that. And I think if we can do that, we're going to have an awful lot of fun with what could be, years of popcorn, nights by the TV binge watching sort of thing. And everybody who's working on the project is so aware of how much you all love these characters and this story, and they feel that sense of responsibility. Sometimes I think they feel it so acutely that I'm, administering cups of tea and saying, it's okay, they're really nice people. They're going to be fine. But they are really aware of your presence, and I think are also really excited about the day when they get to sort of unveil their plans and share them all with you. So we really do have that to look forward to. And meanwhile, with all of these endings and beginnings and change, I just want to say that there are certain things in my life, at least, that have really remained the same. I still live in the same house that I lived in before I wrote any of these books. I only recently sold my old car that I have had since before the series went, and I'm still teaching at the University of Southern California, because the thing that ties all this together, whether it's writing the All Souls trilogy and putting in all those little historical nuggets and Easter eggs in them for you to discover, or coming up with, people say, where do you get your ideas? I get my ideas because I'm up in front of in a room like this 6 times a week, talking to people about things I'm passionate about, the history of books, the history of libraries, the history of alchemy, the history of Europe. This is what I do and what I was trained to do, and that hasn't changed, and it's not changing sort of moving forward into the new books as well. And it's those passions for a life well lived, and for family, and for history, and for places like Oxford or upstate New York or Nashville or wherever it might be. It's those things that run through as a constant amidst all these endings and beginnings and change. And with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to turn the floor over to you. I will answer whatever questions I possibly can. And I think it's probably fair to say that at this point, most of us in the room have read all of the books. And so if you guys want to ask me, this is the first time I've ever done this either. If you want to ask, you can ask me anything you want about the books. If you haven't read them and you feel like your whole life is going to be wrecked by hearing things, you just might want to, yes, you feel like, oh no, it's all going to get spoiled, don't you? No. Okay. Well, I mean, if it's, just remember that, if you want to ask, that would be, I still think it's probably okay at this point, since the 3rd book came out in paperback just a little while ago. So, any questions, comments, concerns? Madam in the back row.
Yes, I'd like to start by thanking you for the All Souls trilogy. The books have given me countless hours of enjoyment as I've read and reread them. The rich and vivid descriptions make me feel connected and that I'm in the scene with the characters. Philippe has my heart. So I am making my pitch for him to have broad swaths of information in the book.
Well, as I think you can, thank you so much, first of all. But as I think you can probably imagine, there isn't going to be a whole lot of backstory that can be told without Philippe being a pretty big part of it. And that really is. It's not just because, like you, he has a big place in my heart. It's also because he does have a really great backstory. And also, I don't know it all. Because he plays his cards very, very close to the vest, which is one of the reasons I love Philippe, but he can be a very frustrating character to get down on the page and to pin down. And so it's been also a lot of fun for me because there were times when I thought I had a really perfect sense of what Philippe was up to, and it turns out in the longer writing of it, that's interesting. So I get to kind of keep having that discovery and working it out. So I'm glad. So I think you'll have some fun in the years to come. Yeah. Yes, right down here.
In your stories, you give us throughout the 3 books a lot of little nuggets of backstory, and you place them and piece them together, in your own head, the reader, I'm saying, and you're like, and you want to read more about it. So I'm really excited about your upcoming project. Well, I do the same thing as I'm reading. I think, I wonder why she, And one of the things that has, and it's kind of close to me, is Diana's birthday.
Yeah.
Is August 13th, 1976, correct? Well, my birthday's August 13th, 1972. And so as a result, we had that same birthday, other than her birthday being on a Friday the 13th.
Which it is.
Because I checked. Why did you pick that date as her birthday?
Why did I pick it? It is because it is the traditional ancient feast day for the goddess Diana.
Okay.
So that is why Miriam says August the 13th, because it was the feast for the goddess Diana, which kind of can tell you something a little bit about how old Miriam might be. But yeah, so the feast day was celebrated then. And so that's the day that's holy to Diana.
Is that an every year thing?
So every year, so all of the so this is where,
My birthday.
right, so here's the thing, so you have, all those real details really matter to me when I'm working on characters.
I knew it had to. I knew that there was a real reason. I knew it wasn't just a throwaway.
Right, so so people said to me all from the very beginning, like, well, why is this called the All Souls Trilogy? I was like, oh, well, there's lots of reasons. He said, well, what are they? And I was like, well, it's Matthew's college, but one of the other reasons is that it's his true birthday. It was his birthday when he was born as a human being, and the reason he remembers it is because it was a Catholic festival. So, because at that point, people weren't really into remembering birthdays like we are in 500 AD, but he, it was always remembered that was the day that his birthday, right? But we know when his sort of rebirth day was, which is in June. So yeah, Matthew is a weird thing. He's astrologically both a Gemini and a Scorpio, which explains a lot for those of you who know astrology. But, so even like knowing their astrological signs and that she was a Leo.
Yes. And, and she was considered the lion
That's
throughout
right.
the books.
That's
and
right.
So
Exactly. So, and that's when, when all those things start to fit together, that's when you start getting something that feels like it's so organic and real that as an adult, you kind of can start thinking, maybe she's not making this up. Maybe this really is real. And that's, as a reader, that I need that level, myself, I need that level of attention to detail in order to really be able to let myself go into the fantasy.
Right, and I knew there had to be some sort of detail, as well as with the different places. How many of us have, you finish a section and then you go Google that castle, and just to see.
Yeah, I never make up anything if I don't have to. So Ashmole 782 is a real manuscript, and it's really missing. And it's one of the few that I haven't been able to look at. Because I was thinking, what would bring a witch and a vampire together, hypothetically? Oh, a missing book. I thought, that annoying missing book. Yeah. So, and they still haven't found it. Every couple months I sort of check in with the Bodleian. I'm like, have you found it yet? And they're like, no, but we have to say a lot of people do request it these days. So the poor library staff at the Bodleian, whenever I go over, I'm like, afraid they're going to throw rotten eggs at me. Thanks for your question. More questions? Yes, right here in the stripes.
I was wondering, when you were writing, you decided you wanted to write about witches and demons and vampires, the background, the lore. How did you decide that, vampires could be in pictures? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, what I did was once I realized, oh my God, I'm writing about a vampire. That's weird. And I started reading books about lore about vampires and witches. And the witches were the easy part, because the witches, what I did was I sort of decided I was going to take everything that my historical research subjects believed about witches in the 15th and 16th century and bring it through to the present. And I did this for Matthew Royden, too. Matthew Royden's a real person. And what little I knew about him in the 16th century, I brought through into the 21st and built the character of Matthew around him. So I did a lot of that sort of thing, but I also like this idea that, really it wasn't the vampires writing books about vampires or the demons writing books about demons. So I like the idea that somehow figuring out what would be the dumb things human beings had come up with. And I started reading vampire lore. I was like, okay, fangs, retractable or not? No. Bursting into flame at sunlight. No. These would be the kind of things that you would come up with only if you were a human being. Because, how would you make yourself feel safe that these creatures weren't around you? You'd say, well, they can't be out during daylight. And, well, they'd have fangs, so I'd know, or whatever. And I started thinking, yeah, that's the kind of thing we make up all the time to make ourselves not pay attention to what's going on around us. And so that's how I did it, was to go through and take out anything that did not make logical sense to me. Because I'm a historian of science, so I study worldview and cosmology, which is basically a history of how people over time have made up stories about the world and how it worked. But the thing about worldviews is this: they have to be logically and internally consistent. And I kept thinking, I just kept discarding anything that couldn't somehow be consistent in this day and age. And it was one of the reasons why every bit of magic or like the creature differentiation had to be backed up by a science. So even the genetics had to fit with what was going on. I had read so many scientific journals that I now get spam emails that say things like, are you having problems running your gels? Problems with your peptides? And I'm thinking, no, because I'm a historian. But I read a lot of genetics. And the other thing that I also did was, Diana's Not Magic is actually based on a branch of mathematics called topology, which is the mathematics of transmutation. So anybody who's played with Mobius bands and crossed them, and it's the science. There was a kind of viral video of how a donut and a coffee cup were the same thing mathematically, that kept morphing one into the other. So, well, we've already got the chemistry of transmutation. We'll use knots and Mobius, this idea of the unbreakable band and knot theory, which is a branch of topology, for Diana's magic. Because obviously, what is magic? It transforms reality. So is there some way to do it? And that's how everything had to kind of sort of fit. So I just sort of rewrote it. And that was one of the great things about the project, was that I got to take what was to me sometimes a kind of inconsistent and incoherent batch of legends and actually build them into a worldview that I could believe might actually be true. So some beloved things: the bats, the capes, the fangs, they all left. But hopefully we ended up with something else instead that we can, pardon the pun, sink our teeth into. Yes?
It because I think we had talked it out with them earlier, but I'm asking anyway. So when she absorbs, I don't want to give spoilers for if you're behind. So in my head, the first time I read it, I'm reading like the tree, like they're just kind of tattoos, right? Like she didn't physically, like her skin didn't physically like change.
No, the book of life does not physiologically change her. She does not actually have a tree growing out of the top of her head.
I saw the guy from Guardians of the Galaxy in my head. And I was like, I'm sure that's not what she meant.
So here's the key thing, and of course this made perfect sense to me, but let me just tell you, you are not the only person to think that. So clearly I was not clear on this.
Well, I was probably figuring it was me. Because
No, it's not you. Trust me.
And she's like, you need to ask. Because
You need to
I
ask.
wanted to know too.
Exactly, because you're, like I tell my students, if you have a question about it, chances are excellent that thousands of others do as well. Is to think about it like, remember, the Book of Life is a palimpsest. So remember that sort of way that there were sort of shadowy images under the surface when Diana first saw it? That's what's going on. So that even under like normal circumstances now, it's not like she's wandering around with looking freakish. It's just that when her magic is really switched on, it comes to the surface. So it doesn't even really look like tattoos most of the time because she's a palimpsest. She has
changes.
Yeah, and it'll surface and it'll disappear, and she's got long hair and it's all under there, but if her magic's really active, you're going to see little tiny shadows of branches and around her.
So I sort of was on. I could see it in my head. I was
not quite Guardians of the Galaxy, but you're on. Yeah. You're somewhere. Yeah. But thank you for asking. That's great. Okay, I see questions over here, right over here on the side.
You discussed the lore and legends of vampires and witches. I adore the wonderfully erratic idiosyncrasies of the demon. Mm-hmm. Does that come from lore, or is that from the wonderful imagination of Joseph?
Okay, so what's the deal with the demons then? So as you probably know, my demons are spelled a little differently than other people's demons, and that's because I went back to Greek beliefs about demons. And back in Greek and Roman times, everyone had their own demon. It was a kind of guardian angel, but angels are Judeo-Christian, not Greek and Roman, and so they called them demons. And they were spelled Daemon in Greek, and in Latin, it was translated to genius, the spirit of the place. Okay, so I was playing with demons, guardian, spirity kind of things, and genius. And I also, what happened was in the Christian West was that with Christianity, they didn't want you listening to any voices that weren't God's or the angels, so demons became bad, the A dropped out, they got glowy red eyes, they sat on you, they sucked your life force, because that was part of, they just didn't want that interference from the old beliefs. So I was trying to play with all of that and to weave them together into something, again, that would sort of make sense of all, like, why did the Greeks think they were guardian angels and the Romans think they were these kind of intelligences? I mean, we still use the word genius. And why did the Christians think they might be mad and bad? And I thought, well, what if they were all true? And that's how I came up with them. So that's, again, it kind of goes back to this earlier question about how I spun the lore out. But yeah, they were fun to play with. Yeah, absolutely. Down here in the front.
So she asked a question about interpretation, so I'm going to see if my interpretation on this is right. When you talk about, we're talking about mortality and some of those issues, we've got a vampire who's 1,500 years old and a witch who's mortal or more mortal. With the whole concept of her being with them having children and being a weaver, what is her life expectancy? Is she going to be, because I have just trouble wrapping my mind around this love story if her mortality is what I assume it is, but I'm hoping.
She's just got an ordinary mortality.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was hoping she would be a Janet Gowdy and sort of have a.
Yeah, no, her kids.
Her kids do.
Yeah, but not her. And here's the thing, I will tell you that my, just after, just before I ever got sick with the flu, one of the reasons I got the flu, I think, last summer, was my dad passed away at the end of May. And he had been battling cancer the whole time I was writing this trilogy. So death was really a part, death is just part of life. It just is. And I think we have a lot of problems with death in our culture. I studied the 16th century. People were different about death then because there was no sense that you could cheat it in the 16th century. Whereas I think now we fear getting old, we fear getting sick, we fear dying, and it is just a kind of natural part of a human lifespan, and it's also a normal part of relationships. It's not easy, but it is kind of just what it is. And so, I never, ever wanted to make a story that didn't touch on themes that you and me and other humans could relate to. So yeah, it's you look down the future, you think, ooh, that's going to be hard. But it's hard for all of us, and so that'll give us a chance to explore that when the time comes as well. But I don't think. Don't worry, she's not going to be dying anytime soon. We got a lot of backstories to get through. But no, my anticipation is this, that she, unless somebody throws a monkey wrench at me, and my characters do that on occasion, my sense is that she's just an act like you and me, and that'll be a challenge for the family to overcome. Saw a hand right there, yeah.
Oh, I have a question about Rima.
Yeah.
Because when we seen her in The Shadow of Night,
Uh-huh.
she had found Diana's commonplace.
Mm-hmm.
She was looking for Gerbert's card, the Sheriff Bear's card.
She was looking for, yes, so she could
For
find
his
it,
card,
yeah.
So that she could find it.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, did Baldwin find this out and not want that book in Sheriff Bear's hands?
Mm-hmm.
And is that why he replaced
Mm-hmm.
the old librarian secretary
Yeah.
with Rima?
Yeah, basically what happened is that for those of you who are tracking things really with minute attention, she was working in the Gonsalves archive, which is Fernando's former house. And so when word got through that this woman was poking around with this book and looking for some guy named Gerbert, Fernando jumped on that pretty quickly and called Baldwin, and life got sorted out very rapidly. And maybe we will hear about that in detail at some future point of how that all transpired. But yes, very good eye, yes.
Baldwin's one of my favorites.
Baldwin, okay, so that's another, so we've got a vote for Philippe, a vote for Baldwin. See, we're gonna have fun doing all of this. Yes, right here.
What was thank you for writing these
No,
in
you're
the first place. They're brilliant. What was your original inspiration? How did this begin inside of you?
I was in Mexico on vacation in September when it was raining a lot, and I had flip-flops and a bathing suit with me because nobody told me it rained in Puerto Vallarta in September, and I just had this vision of like a weekend at the beach. And I was at the airport bookstore watching the rain and thinking I should buy a book, and I went into the bookstore, and there was literally a wall of books about ghosts, witches, vampires, goblins, fairies, shapeshifters, things I couldn't even identify. And I looked at that wall and I thought, what happened? I had just finished an academic book, which is shorthand for I had been in a library for 7 years and teaching, and I don't have children. So what I had missed in the fall of 2008 was that a book called Breaking Dawn had recently been released. And I was just like, this is insanity. What has happened? And I thought, look at them. They're all getting this hot romantic action and these what is going on? And that's why when I started with my question. I was like, really? There are vampires? What do they do for a living? Where do they live? How do they date? No one notices them. And then I went off and I sat in this hotel room where there was nothing but football on television and raining outside. And I thought, well, what would they do for a living? How would that work? And I started picking apart these legends, thinking, this is so stupid. If my neighbor had fangs, I would know. And they can't all be living in, wherever. And so that was it. And so I started with questions, almost like it was a fake historical project. And that's where I don't think, if I had sat down and thought, today I will start my novel, and it will be about, I'd never thought about being a novelist.
Thank God you took it.
You're so sweet. Over here, yes.
One of my favorite characters is Gallagher.
Yes. I'll write that down. You're the only person who's ever said that to me. Not.
Now, every time he showed up, it just makes you smile and go, okay, what's he going to say now? Because he was so great in that way. But what was your inspiration for him? Is he based on a real historical figure?
So Gallowglass was a huge surprise to me, too, in that I was sitting around stuck in that damn house, with Matthew and all the School of Night, and I was getting more and more irritated with all of them, and it was just, I just kept thinking, oh God, this is not at all, and all of a sudden I typed, the door blew open, and I thought, hello, and I kept going, and it was like, and there were Gallowglass and Hancock. I had no plan for this at all. Okay, so now because I'm not a plotter and I had no plan for this, I also had no plan for Hamish, but it happened a little earlier in the story. But with Gallowglass, I had no plan for this, and I had to go back. I had to stop everything, go back over Discovery of Witches, like line by line, and pick out anything that I could to kind of situate Gallowglass in the narrative, because once he showed up, He was the only thing to brighten my days some days, was Gallowglass. Because like you, it's like he just makes you smile. As soon as I typed his name, I had kind of committed to a course of action for him, because Gallowglasses were Gaelic mercenaries, probably from the Western Isles of Scotland, who were employed by the Irish royal courts in the Middle Ages. And I had always loved the name. So a Gallowglass is a thing. It's a kind of soldier. But I have family in Wales, and one of the things I know about that part of the world is you end up with these weird nicknames that have to do with what you do. So there was a person that I just grew up knowing was David Chicks. I don't know what his real name was. He was the guy who ran the local chicken farm, and he just became Die Chicks. And there was another guy that was, so-and-so Milk. And these were not their real names. And so Gallowglass became Gallowglass because and then it sort of started forming his character. So he's not a single person, but he stands in for this whole class of mercenary soldiers from the period, yeah. Good question. Yeah, in the blue.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the dual role of being a historian and a novelist.
Okay.
Historians being sort of particularly not a fan of historical fiction, which I think is in a lot of ways really unfortunate. And I'm asking this from a position of the master's degree focused on history and pedagogy. And
Okay.
I think that there's some interesting roles for history not in dry academic text or sort of bringing it alive. And so I feel like that might be an opinion that you also share. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that and sort of how do you balance those two worlds?
Sure. So, as a historian, I feel like my first goal as a researcher is to try to understand the past without judging it. And that is the number one thing I try to teach in my classes. So I teach a great period of history, 1400 to 1800. Europe has a lot of high points in it, but it can be really frustrating when students come in and they think they have, Henry VIII, classic example. Henry VIII was, for those of you who are not aware of it, the worst man who has ever lived. And I have had students attribute everything from the Black Death and the Spanish Inquisition, which he had nothing to do with, all the way to, the rise of fascism. I mean, it goes on and on. And, and I'll listen to this for a good long time, and then I'll say, okay, so does anybody know how old Henry was when he came to the throne? And of course, at that point, all of the comments stop, because they're thinking, was this on the quiz? I don't think this was on the quiz. I say, he was 18 when his father died. I said he was 19 when he was crowned. That's your age. So imagine if someone gave you, a country, and said, you can have it for the rest of your life. And what would you do first? And they're like, well, I'd put all of my friends in positions of power. I'd get a really hot wife. I'd have fun. And I'd spend money. I'm like, bingo. So now let's talk about Henry VIII, because developing that kind of historical sense. And look, the world is not a great place right now because we are having chronic, huge failures of empathy everywhere we look. So history is a really great way to teach empathy. However, I think historians can be something of a downer when people want to sort of explore or be enthusiastic. We tend to sit inside the ivory tower and throw rocks at the people outside of it. But we also, it's actually quite hard work to write historical fiction. And I don't begin to understand how anybody does it who's not a historian. I have nothing but admiration for anybody who gets up and thinks they're going to write a book about Cleopatra and has to spend 6 years research. I'm lucky. I spent decades immersing myself in history as a preamble to this. But most writers, frankly, don't have the time to do that. They need to put food on the table as well. So I think what we have to just do is to just think about it in a slightly different way. It's really not about getting the right answers. It's about having the right questions, and it's about looking for better understanding. We're not philosophers. We don't have to worry about the truth. We can just try to understand how people lived in the past. And I think if historians focus more on that, we'll get a lot further with spreading the excitement of history to a wider audience. So, yeah, thanks for the question. Lady right here in yellow.
As I was reading, I kept going back and forth about what your recreational reading must be. And I know that most authors say that they don't have time to read anymore because they're too busy writing. But when you talk about scientific journals, you talk about the historical archives, but
fiction. And I just wanted to know when you have the time, how do you balance what you're reading?
Oh God, I'm going to be one of those terrible people who says I don't read that much. I don't read much fiction, honestly. And that's in part because I'm actually a professional nonfiction reader, right? So I am reading history, works of history. That's what I'm reading. And I'm reading primary sources, right? So I'm teaching paleography, the science of ancient handwriting this semester. So what I'm reading right now is I'm reading I just read a manuscript called The Bouge of Court, which is a day-by-day accounting of how much fish was eaten at the court of Henry VIII. I find that riveting, but I can understand why it wouldn't be everybody's cup of tea. But that's where I get sort of that's my fun reading, or reading along with my students and what they're reading. So that's it for me. I mean, what I strive for in my writing is, thank you for being so lovely about my prose. I am not a great literary stylist. I think I write like I hope to teach, which is I strive for clarity, and I strive for precision, and for people being able to really kind of imagine themselves into a world, whether it's the world, a historical world or a fictional world. And I think, so I'm delighted that works for you. Yeah. So I think we've only sadly got time for one more question. How about this lady over
I'm just curious, if you polled 100 people and you said, what's your image when you hear the word vampire or witch, they would come up with some negative image. Did you purposefully choose to put a positive persona on Matthew and Diana?
I did because guess what? Human beings are the ones who make monsters. So, and we tend to do that out of fear, and we tend to do that to distance ourselves from people we don't understand or who we don't think are like us. So again, it goes back to the question about what I want from history, right? I think the most important thing in the world is empathy. And that's not tolerance. That's not saying, yeah, all right, well, you're different from me, but I guess I can live with it. It's about being able to say, I now see through your eyes, and I see that the world is different for you than it would be for me. And even though that's the case, I think you deserve to be treated with as much dignity and respect as I do. And so that's why I couldn't let go of this project once I'd started, because I thought, this is really, that's kind of important stuff, right? To try to understand before we judge, and to understand before we label. And that was really, you've got what the essence of the book is about, which is that there are, the people we often think of as monsters. There are some truly evil people in the world, but very often the ones that we think of as monsters really may not be quite so monstrous if we just took the time to understand them a little bit better. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it. If I didn't get to your question, you are just going to see me in a little bit, so you can ask me there. But thank you for being such a wonderful audience. Thanks again to the library and Parnassus and BookPage for bringing me here. You were a great audience. Thanks.